Hello everyone. The states of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina are home to over 26 million people. Despite this, all of the large Polatina areas in these three states are located far inland, away from the Atlantic coast, making them very different from the Northeastern states and Florida. So why aren't more people living on the empty East Coast? But before we get started, subscribe to our channel, give us a like and post the video on social media. Next, I'll discuss why so few Americans live in this vast area of the East Coast. Today we're off to explore another relatively desolate region of the United States. This time we're traveling to the Southeast. And while this region has millions of people compared to the Northeast and Florida, it's rather odd that not many people live along the coasts of this region. And, as usual, there's a geographic reason for that. The empty East Coast, encompassing the eastern territories of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, is home to a rather unique set of geographical features that have both favored and hindered human settlement and economic activity. The region discussed in this video is generally characterized by flat sandy beaches, barrier islands, and extensive salt marshes. These barrier islands, while very picturesque and emblematic of the southeast coast, are a sort of two-edged sword. They provide some protection from the wrath of the Atlantic, but are often not stable enough to support large-scale and sustained human activity, such as the operation of major ports. Further inland, the hills and low mountains begin a gradual ascent, offering different opportunities and challenges. This geography has influenced the types of industries that have flourished here, historically centered on agriculture, especially the plantation cultivation of crops such as tobacco, cotton, and rice in Georgia and South Carolina. It was this penchant for plantations and agriculture that ultimately led to the dramatic rise of slavery in these states, as running such huge farms required an incredible amount of labor. This part of the Southeast's history left an indelible mark not only on the region's economy, but also on the demographics of the Southeast, which is still home to the majority of Black Americans. As of 2021, the entire southern region of the U.S. was home to about 56% of the nation's Black population, and Atlanta alone was home to about 2,200,000 people, second only to New York City. In North Carolina, the topography is somewhat more varied, with the flat coastal plain giving way to the Piedmont uplands and then the Appalachian Mountains. Forestry and mining add to the region's economic activity. The empty East Coast is also marked by significant rivers, such as the Savannah River, which also serves as a natural boundary between Georgia and South Carolina, and the Cape Fear River in North Carolina. But while these rivers were important for domestic trade and transportation, they were not large enough to facilitate any significant maritime trade in the same way that the Mississippi River and the St. Lawrence River did in the Midwestern United States and Canada, respectively. Finally, another important aspect to consider is the region's vulnerability to extreme climate events, particularly hurricanes. This shapes not only the natural landscape, but also human activities and settlement patterns. Disaster risk has always been a background factor in the planning and coastal development of this particular region. Since 1990, 56 hurricanes and tropical storms have hit the region, making it one of the most dangerous regions to live in terms of disaster preparedness. Only Florida gets more hurricanes here, but that's because hurricanes come from the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. The empty East is a very interesting region of the country, but in case you haven't realized it yet, its history and geography create problems for creating large population centers on the coast, and we're about to find out why that is. The southeastern coast of the United States, specifically the states of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, developed very differently than their northern neighbors, unlike states like New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts. With deep harbors carved out by glaciers and facilitating the growth of large urban centers, the southeastern coast is a vast swath of barrier islands, salt marshes, and flat plains. The lack of natural harbors in the area meant that these states never developed into significant centers of maritime trade. It is this geographic limitation that has had a cascading effect on the region's population, making it agriculturally oriented, which has lasting effects today. The region's barrier islands provide some protection from the Atlantic Ocean, but in reality, they are not resilient enough to support the large-scale maritime activity required to operate major ports. New York City, for example, is built on a natural harbor formed by glaciation tens of thousands of years ago, which allowed it to pile up such a large cargo with minimal impact. Lacking natural harbors, the southeastern states could not easily participate in the transatlantic trade that was the catalyst for the industrialization and urbanization of northeastern cities. Instead, the Southeast developed a plantation economy based on cash crops such as rice, cotton, and tobacco. The broad flat lands away from the coast were well suited for large-scale agriculture, and the region's hot, humid climate provided ideal conditions for these crops to flourish. Plantations required large amounts of labor, which led to the monstrous importation and enslavement of Africans, a historical atrocity with long-term social and cultural consequences for the region and the country as a whole. And unlike the diversified economy of the Northeast, which included manufacturing, shipping, and ultimately technology, the Southeast became economically specialized into a plantation economy fueled by the forced labor of slaves. It was this plantation economy that prevented urbanization. Plantations were largely self-sufficient enterprises that did not depend on urban centers for labor or goods. Neither was the manufacturing industry. The small towns and cities that did emerge were usually oriented toward supporting agriculture rather than industrial production. Even the region's significant rivers, such as the Savannah and Cape Fear, could not compensate for the lack of natural harbors. They served more as canals for domestic trade than as gateways for international trade. Even as modern economies diversify and technology loosens geographic constraints, the Southeast's historic focus on agriculture leaves an indelible mark. While cities like Atlanta and Charlotte have grown into major metropolitan areas by becoming transportation hubs and diversifying their economies, coastal areas still bear the mark of a bygone era dominated by plantations and agrarian lifestyles. While the coastal areas of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina are rich in natural beauty, they do not attract as dense a population as the Northeast, Florida, or even nearby metropolitan areas such as Atlanta and Charlotte. Historical factors such as lack of natural harbors and plantation economies aside, there are several modern reasons for this disparity in population density. Metropolitan areas are major magnets for population, and employment opportunities in these coastal regions are often less abundant and diverse than in other regions of the country. While tourism and some agriculture and fishing are prominent, there simply aren't as many jobs in these industries compared to popular industries such as manufacturing. And while large metropolitan areas like Atlanta, Charlotte, and the Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle have become major corporate centers that attract young professionals and create a wide range of jobs, they have become all-consuming for the region as a whole. In a sense, these metros have sucked the economic vitality out of cities that might otherwise have become major cities on the coasts, and a lot of that is due to infrastructure, especially as it relates to transportation. And in this region, Atlanta has become the dominant transportation hub, displacing most other regional cities. Atlanta was once known as one of the largest railroad hubs in the country and still has the largest airport. Cities like Savannah, Georgia, don't have as many transportation options, further discouraging businesses from locating there. Today, the entire region we're talking about is home to just over 10 million people. That's actually quite a lot. But it still remains relatively empty compared to the development of other regions in the eastern half of the country. The region's largest metropolitan areas are Charleston, South Carolina, with populations of about 820,000 and 800,000, respectively, Fayetteville in Wilmington, North Carolina, with 520,282,000, and Savannah, Georgia, with 404,000. While none of these areas are tiny, all of them combined account for less than half of Atlanta's 6,100,000 people, which is interesting since Charleston predates Atlanta by more than 150 years. Interestingly, despite Atlanta being the largest city in the southern region of the country, Charleston, South Carolina predates Georgia's capital by more than 150 years. And given its location on the Atlantic coast, the colonial rulers' desire for easy access to their new lands and the need for water-related transportation. Arguably, the South Carolina city should have grown to become the dominant city of the Southeast, not Atlanta. But, alas, history tends to unfold otherwise. One of the key factors in the evolution of the two cities is Atlanta's role as a transportation hub. Founded as a railroad hub called Terminus, Atlanta's strategic location made it a hub for various modes of transportation, linking the agricultural wealth of the South to markets in the Midwest and Northeast. This central location has been further strengthened with the development of the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, which has become one of the busiest airports in the world. It attracts businesses and residents alike. And while Charleston had more than 100 years of advantage, its physical geography was limited in a way that Atlanta's was not. You see, Charleston is located on a peninsula bounded by the rivers, Cooper and Ashley, and the Atlantic Ocean. This geographic limitation somewhat narrowed its opportunities for expansion. Unlike Atlanta, which had more opportunities for outward growth and development. The low coastal landform line around Charleston also makes it more vulnerable to sea level rise and extreme weather events. This may have deterred some forms of major investment and large-scale urban development. Social and cultural factors have also played a role in the divergent paths of the cities. Although both cities are vibrant cultural centers, Atlanta has gained a reputation as the unofficial capital of the South, attracting international events such as the 1996 Summer Olympics and serving as the birthplace of influential civil rights movements. Charleston, despite its cultural richness and historical significance, did not become the scene for events of similar international or national scope. In the end, Atlanta simply had too many advantages at the time of its founding, and by 1890 it was already bigger than South Carolina. It was already bigger than the most populous city in South Carolina. It's very interesting to look at the Northeast and Southeast and how they developed geographically. You can practically draw a line where, moving south, you can see the major population centers moving away from the Atlantic coast. But while many of these coastal communities don't have as large a population as Atlanta or Charlotte, they still have much more to offer, or even more to offer in terms of cultural and historical attractions. Guys, if you enjoyed our video but haven't subscribed to us yet, then subscribe now and post the video on social media. There will be more to come in future episodes. See you soon. Bye.